All right, cool. Well, welcome aboard. Thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Eric Parker. I'm excited to get underway with you. I recognize some names for sure. Uh, some of you all may know me from different Tableau classes you've taken, or maybe you've just been kind of following the blog or the YouTube channel for a bit. So we appreciate that. So I work with an organization called One Number, and we do all kinds of different work in the analytics space. A lot of it's Tableau related, as you can tell by this webinar. We do data preparation and visualization and mentoring and classes, consulting, like all kinds of things. So doing these webinars and videos is kind of just a small piece of what I do, but I like to be able to try and pay it forward and help people understand how to use Tableau, because it's not always so apparent. So today's topic of conversation is going to be, how do you prepare survey data for analysis in Tableau? And for today, we're going to really focus in on how do you prepare the survey data in Tableau Desktop. So without having to go use some other kind of tool, how could you prepare this data for analysis? All right. So I guess I just sort of kind of pre-answered this slide, which is our purpose here is to learn how, but also why it would be important to prepare our survey data for analysis in Tableau Desktop. Okay. So I think part of the reason that I wanted to cover this topic, several years ago, we did a video about how to prepare data, survey data in Tableau Prep. And when I put together this recording and send out the materials, I will link to that, because the process of preparing survey data in Tableau Prep is a little bit different than Tableau Desktop. And the reason I wanted to cover this topic is because I don't think it's always super clear how you're supposed to prepare data for analysis in Tableau. And then, survey data is like its own subset of that discussion as well, because survey data has kind of its own unique structure that isn't necessarily, I guess, the same as other kind of standard data sources. So give me just a second here to launch my screen mockup tool, which I think I'm going to need. All right, so generally speaking, survey data is set up so that each question is captured in a column, right? So you'd have like Q1, and then whatever people's responses were to that, Q2, and so on. And so I've worked with data sources where it might just be a few questions, or it might be hundreds of questions, right? So the scope of how large of a data source we're talking about here can vary. But something that's unique about capturing each question in its own column is that, first of all, it makes analyzing multiple questions at the same time pretty cumbersome, right? Like you'd have to drag an individual column onto every single worksheet for every single question you want to see, which is not ideal. Being able to do any sort of like numeric analysis, like, oh, what was the average score that this person gave for these 5 questions? That becomes more difficult and becomes a pretty hands-on calculation. And then one of our big topics of conversation today will be that you are fairly limited in your ability to analyze multi-response questions. So I guess I'll kind of get into that in a little bit, but oftentimes you'll see that data comma delimited. So, hey, select all that apply. I have participated in these kinds of activities, that kind of stuff. All right. So what our session here is going to look like is we're going to, first of all, kind of just glance at 1 or 2 kinds of visuals that you might want to create when you're analyzing survey data. We're going to look at some survey data. We're going to shape some of that survey data in Tableau Desktop. And then we'll kind of wrap up with talking about where does Tableau Desktop maybe stop, and where would you need to bring in another tool or do some extra preparation in order for things to work the way that you might want. So I'm just going to start with sort of a classic survey data visual. So this is just displaying 5 questions. Each of these questions has a 1 through 5 response that a respondent could give. So for instance, with this data, we're looking at sort of educational, I guess it's like somebody who went to college and then their feedback, like, hey, I enjoyed the extracurriculars, I don't really use my education, like whatever that might be. So you can see that just looking at the colors even, this first question, I'm satisfied with the education I've received, got more positive responses than this last question here, which is I am satisfied with the career coordination. Okay, so more than 50% negative on the last question, more than almost 70% positive on the first question. So what we're looking at right now would either not be possible or would be pretty difficult to visualize like this in a single worksheet with the default way that survey data is captured. Okay, so just to show you the survey data that's feeding this visual, and then we're actually going to do some preparation together, I just created some fake survey data. So it's not perfect, but it's pretty good for the purposes of what we're doing. So again, each respondent is somebody who, let's say, graduated from a college. And then they got to say, hey, here's where I live now. Here's where I work. Here's the kind of degree that I got. Here's what I'm getting paid these days. Here's some activities that I took part in while I was in college. So this is going to be our multiple response question. See, there's a few different answers there between commas. And then there's a handful of different types of responses or questions, I should say. So you've got a block that's kind of our true false questions, columns M through O. We've got our numeric 1 through 5 responses, which is P through T. And then we've got our frequency responses, which is U through W. So this isn't a comprehensive list of any type of possible question you could ask. Of course, there's different numeric ranges or open text responses where somebody could type in literally anything. But this is just to kind of give an example of, okay, we have a few different types of questions. Now, how are we going to combine this all, and how are we going to break these out once we get into Tableau Desktop? Okay. So flipping back here, I'm going to go ahead and kick off a new worksheet. And we're going to actually end up recreating this visual, but we'll do some other things in the meantime as well. And I've got a few different copies of the data source here for the sake of our examples. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the data source. And right now, this is just exactly that Excel file you just saw, just loaded into Tableau Desktop. So you'll see all those same columns, respondents and names and demographic information, and then all these different questions. Okay. So a kind of simple approach to preparing survey data in Tableau Desktop would just be to pivot every question. So going back to the very first true false question, actually no, it even started before that. It's the social activities question. I'm going to click on this column. I'm going to scroll to the right all the way to the end. I'm going to shift select through the last column. And then I'm just going to pivot all of these columns. Okay, so what that just did is all of the column names are now captured here, pivot field names, and then all of the column, or all the question responses, I should say, are now here. So you can see it's a whole mix of things: yearly, never, true, 3. Like, it's kind of a mishmash now in that response column, but all of our question responses are there. So I could probably kind of hear some of you screaming internally already, like, oh my gosh, why would we do that? That seems like a crazy thing to do. We will come back to this and talk about, are there any drawbacks to pivoting every column, and how have you maybe restricted yourself? Just know, for those that are like about to rage quit, we're going to get to those conversations. We're just starting with the very simple approach of just pivot everything. Okay. So I'm going to just rename pivot field names to question name. And then pivot field values will be, I'll just rename this to response. And then I'm just going to put all in parentheses so I know that this is all of our text and numeric responses and like everything in one place. Okay, so what we can do with this now is that in theory, we could pull a respondent onto our worksheet. So let's find somebody specific. So Sunny Ferrant. And then we're going to put the question name out here. So you can see about 10 possible questions that have been responded to. And then I'm just going to grab the response field, which, quick side note, notice that the response field is a string, indicating that, yeah, like you probably wouldn't really be able to do numeric analysis against this, which is okay. We're not trying to do that yet, but we will be eventually. I'll just put this here as another column on rows. Okay, cool. So now we could kind of just quickly see, like, great, here's our people, here are the 10 questions they've been asked, and here are their responses to those. So the beauty of having a setup like this is that I can just quickly like flip question name over to filters. And if I just want to keep only the frequency questions, just select those, hit OK, and I can see how people just responded to those questions. So even just in this brief interaction, you can see how this is probably easier than like having 10 different columns where I got to drag them all out individually. And this is maybe a little bit more of a personal preference, but something that I like to do is actually to organize those questions. So I'm going to go to the question name field and create a group. And I'll just call this question type. So like those first three, how often, those are like frequency style questions. You're like never, always, sometimes. Social activity. This is a multi-response question. Got to figure out which ones are the true falses. I still feel connected. I would choose to go here again, and my career success is largely due to my education. Those are our, just call this true false. And then everything that's left, I think in this case, would be our 1 through 5. So the beauty of having this question type group that we just created is now it's even easier for me. I don't have to like look through the series of questions and figure out if I'm only caring about, I just want to see the true false questions. I just pop that on there and then it's filtered down like that. So of course, this becomes a little bit more difficult or a little bit more involved as the scope of your data grows larger. You know, I've only got 10 questions. If you have 100 questions, that might take a little more work. But I would also say then it will probably be more valuable because then you don't have to pick through 100 questions. You just got to organize them all once, then you're good to go. Okay, so if we, going back to that first visual that we looked at, if we want to recreate this, this is just doing numeric analysis, right? So what I like to do is I like to create a couple different response fields, one that are just text responses to questions, and then one that are numeric responses. And we're actually going to use our question type field to help us do this. So for example, I'm going to create a calculated field. I'm going to call this response, and then I'll put number in parentheses. So I'll say if question type equals 1 through 5, then response all. And then to convert this to just being a number output, I'm going to wrap this in the integer function. Okay, so notice it just popped up as a measure down here. And if I put this on text in the marks card, for instance, it just added all of the responses together. So it gave us this crazy number, but notice there's no numeric responses showing up under frequency or multi-response. And then actually, if we want to do the opposite of that for text-based responses, see how Tableau likes my approach here. I'll call this response text. And then I'll just say, get rid of the integer thing we did there. And then if question type does not equal 1 to 5, so if it's frequency, multi-response, true, false, then give me a response. Well, this is going to look weird, but yeah, then you can see, okay, there's no response text coming out of 1 through 5, but there are a bunch of different possible response texts based on the other fields. All right, cool. So getting back to our numeric response example, okay, I'll just call this like numeric question analysis. So a few things. I'm going to start with question name, put that on the row shelf. We're going to use our question type group we've created, drop this on filters. We only want our 1 through 5 types of questions. I want to know how many total responses we received, and then we're going to break it down into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just going to create a calculated field to do this. I'm assuming that each person could only respond to the survey once, so I'm just using respondent ID. So give me a distinct count of respondent ID. I drop this on the column shelf. We should end up with, yeah, each of these bars. Everybody responded to every question, so there's 500 responses for each one of these. Let me flip my fit to entire view. I'm a bit of a formatting weirdo, so it annoys me that those are right aligned. I want them left aligned. I think they're a little easier to read like that. Okay, so now we need to break this into the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 responses. So I'm just going to get a copy of response number. I'm going to drop this out here on the marks card. And I don't just want to throw this on color because each of them, or I guess this is just going to sum the response numbers. We want to see them broken into 5 distinct colors. So let me go ahead and just go back one step. So I'm going to change this sum of response measure. I'm going to tell it to become a dimension, and I'm going to tell it to become discrete. So what this means is that this is going to act more like a dimension now, in that it's going to give us distinct colors, right? You can see our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in play. And then I think what I had done previously is I kind of used orange to mean more negative responses, and I just had to manually pick this. And then blue indicated more favorable responses. And then I think we can probably just change the sort order here. If I go to response number on color, hit the drop down the pill, sort it, and then do descending so that the positive responses are on the right side rather than the left side. So already we're getting a bit of a feel for which of these questions received more positive responses, which is versus which ones received more negative responses, right? So if we want to see the percentage breakdown, I'm going to get a copy by control dragging number of responses from columns to label. I'm going to go ahead and just do I'll do the add table calculation, I guess. This will be percent of total on table across. And I probably don't want a bunch of decimal places. It's just going to make this hard to look at in an already fairly busy visual. So I'm just going to do no decimals on those percentages. Okay, so one extra thing that I had on this initial example was I also just put what was the average response. I just dropped that in there as a column. I think that could be valuable just to get a general idea of sentiment, right? Like, hey, this got a generally positive response, an average response of 4. This actually got a little bit of a negative response. This was an average of 2.4, right? So to be able to set that up, it's a little tricky. We'll need a level of detail calculation for this. So I'm going to create a calculated field. And then what I will do is I'm going to say fixed on question name, give me the average response number. So you might be like, what are we talking about? How did we end up in level of details? Why does this matter? Okay, so because we used the response number field like a dimension for the sake of coloring this visual, if I then tried to put a measure, which was like average response number, it would just break each of these questions into 5 different rows, all the 1s, all the 2s, all the 3s, and it wouldn't work the way we want. I mean, I guess I can show you that because I'm jumping ahead here a little bit. So just to show you how this would look, if I just straight up asked for the average response number without our LOD wrapping, just set it to a decimal or a single decimal, I should say. So if I just try to throw this on rows and then set it to discrete so it shows up as a label, right? It's just like the average of the 1s is 1. And you're like, thank you. I know that. I want the average of all the responses. So because we're using response number like a dimension, this unfortunately is not really going to work the way that we wanted. However, do a quick edit here. I'm going to uncomment my level of detail content. So it is fixing on each question and then giving us the average response on that question. Oh yeah, it got mad because the aggregation changed. That's all right. Let me do actually a quick answer for that would just be to add an aggregation like average. There we go. And now you can see that it is showing us our averages like 4, 3.2, 2.8. And then I think I could just sort on those values if it will let me. I'm going to sort the question name field based on the descending value of average response. And there you go. Now the questions that received the most positive responses are at the top, and then the least positive average, at least, is on the bottom. All right, so that's not so much about preparing the data itself, but kind of showing an example of like, why would it be important to prepare the data? If we hadn't prepared the data and done the pivots the way we did, we could probably still accomplish something like what we did here, but you'd have to do it in 5 separate worksheets for the 5 separate questions, and you'd just lose a lot of flexibility. Okay. So I mentioned that the way that we prepared this data by just pivoting every column was a little bit simplistic and could have some unintended consequences. So let me start by talking about what a few of those limitations are. One of the limitations, I guess I didn't consciously think about it until I was preparing for this webinar, is that you can't both duplicate a field to have a copy of it and then pivot on the original copy and have like, oh, here's the original true false column, and then also I pivoted the true false response. That may not make sense, so let me show you what I mean when I talk about that. So I've just got a fresh copy of that Excel file. So something that I was thinking about is I was like, well, yeah, there might be situations where you would want to pivot the true false responses. But then on the other hand, there may be times where you want to just use them as filters, right? Like, I still feel connected to the university community. It would be interesting to use that as a filter and to see if saying true or false gave different outputs for how satisfied somebody was with their education or what kind of activities they participated in. So like, I thought I'd be smart, and I was like, cool, maybe I want to kind of have my cake and eat it too. I want it both ways. So I'm going to take this true false. I'm going to duplicate this column. Yeah, I forgot duplicate's not like a default option here. Okay, I'm going to do it from a worksheet then. I'll just use that one column as an example. I still feel connected. So we're just going to quick duplicate this field so we have the exact same field, just a copy of it. So again, I thought I would be slick with Tableau, and I was like, cool, now I have that field in case I want to filter on true false. Now let me just select everything. Let me see if I can find that duplicate just to make sure I didn't include it. I think my eyesight is going. There it is. So let's try and duplicate everything except, did I say duplicate? Let's try and pivot everything except the duplicate. Oh no, I hit the wrong button. Oh my gosh. Okay, try this again. And pivot. So again, I thought I'd be all smart with this, and then wah, wah, right? It's like, nope, you can't do that. That field is gone. Oh no, right? So Tableau isn't really a sequential tool, at least when it comes to data preparation, in the same way that Tableau Prep is. So I can't be like, cool, I duplicated it first. Now it's kind of saved this thing off over here. Now I can take the original column and do whatever the heck I want with it. Tableau's like, nope, that column is gone and you can't reference it anymore. So that's too bad. I do have a solution for you if you've ever run into something like this. If you're like, I still need it as a filter. So let me go back to the data source where we pivoted everything. I'm kind of bouncing around on you here. So something that we could do is, let's use that one, I still feel connected to the university community, I think is what it was called. Just to make sure I get the text perfect, I'm going to view the data, copy the value here. So I could just hand code the column again. I still feel, oh, I guess I got to paste it here. I still feel connected to the university community. If question name is that, then response all. So by default, this is only going to give us the response for that question. Right, if I drop this on text, I'll basically see whatever somebody responded to that question, and then it's all blanks for the other questions. But really, I would probably want this to apply to that respondent across the board if I'm ever trying to analyze other questions like, cool, what was their responses to the 1 through 5s? So a way of using an LOD to do that is I could say fixed on my respondent ID, give me their maximum response based on this prompt. So we're just kind of basically tricking Tableau out to say every row of data you see for respondent 100, just attach true to it. True, 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 true. Just do that over and over again so that I can filter the other questions based on their response to this question. And you could use min or max or whatever. It doesn't really matter. You're just telling Tableau to give you, this value over and over again at the respondent ID level. So it will seem subtle, but now check it out. So now we've got trues across the board for every row of data for respondent 100, or false for every person that's 101. So what's nice about this is that I could still use this field as a filter. If I wanted to say, yeah, did people have, if they said true, did they have different types of responses than people that said false? Did that make a difference to the average response scores? I don't know. Oh, I think actually, I didn't think about that. Add that to context. This is also an LOD, so we've gotten ourselves in a whole nother situation here. All right, that's not really what I meant to dive into in too much detail. I just want to show there are workarounds if you kind of want to have your cake and eat it too. It's just a little bit involved. You have to kind of create a standalone LOD calc like that. So we just sort of saw this in action, and then I just saw my typo there, so nice. You can't pivot columns which were split in Tableau Desktop. This is a really big bummer in my opinion because it really hamstrings you when it comes to analyzing multiple response questions. So something I was looking at is I was like, okay, well, one of the ways that we might want to handle this would be that I want to be able to split that multiple response questions, like social activities participated in. So let me just split this for, oh crap, I need to do custom split. Hold on one second. There we go. So I want to split it on the comma and then give me all of my columns. So now I should have all of these different social activities participated in splits. So then I was like, cool, I want to pivot these, but Tableau won't let you pivot on a split or a calculated field. The reason that that's kind of limiting for us is because if I was to say, hey, what were the top 3 extracurricular activities that these students participated in? How would you do that, right? It's broken into a bunch of different columns. So ideally, you'd need to get all of these responses in a single column to be able to answer a question like that. As it is, we're somewhat limited. Like we could set up a parameter and say, oh, what was the breakdown of participation in arts by gender? Or what was the participation in debate? But again, we're somewhat limited to looking for a single value at a time, as opposed to saying, hey, here's all of the responses for that multi-response, and then rank them, sort them, whatever that might be. I just want to do a quick pause here for a second to say, in typical fashion for me, running over a little bit. So if you have to jump, totally get that. We're probably like within a few minutes of closing out if you are good to bump for a little bit. If not, like I said, this is being recorded. So within about a week, I'll have this recording out so you can kind of see the final few minutes, revisit the workbook, whatever it is you might need. Okay, so that was sort of our second limitation. And then the final limitation is, I'll be honest, I was up at 3 a.m. thinking about this webinar. That sounds like a joke. It's not even a joke. I wish it was. And I was like, man, I need a third thing. I need a third limitation to talk about. And I couldn't find one, so I gave up. I was like, okay, we're just going to talk about the first 2 limitations. But this morning, kind of in the final hour while I was preparing, it came to me. One of the bummers about doing survey data prep in Tableau Desktop is if your survey changes at all, like let's say you add some new questions to the survey, there's not really an easy way to backtrack and then add them to the pivot that you did, a long time ago. So for instance, as I was preparing this survey data, when I first built it, I only had one frequency question. And then I don't know, I felt inspired and I was like, I think I need a couple more frequency questions. So I actually built out a couple more. And then I realized, I was like, cool, I just need to update the data source. I'd already pivoted it, I already created some calculations, I'd already built this first numeric response example. And so I was like, cool, so so a couple things. I need to, I had it as an extract just for the sake of performance. So I was like, cool, I'm gonna go back to a live connection, and then I'm gonna edit the connection and survey data final. That's the updated version you can see last ran on 225. And then I was like, oh yeah, so now there's these new questions, right? So you can see that I've already got columns like question group, the question name, the response. But now I've got these new frequency questions, which I added to the survey later. Well, the pivot's done, right? The pivot was done a long time ago. Like it was I saved the workbook and whatever. So I don't have a way of like adding these to that pivot that previously occurred, which stinks. So unless somebody has a better answer for me, and I'm open to it if somebody's got an idea, the best answer I have for you is start over. And that sounds brutal. And it's not like it's totally like you lose everything. What I would probably recommend in this case would be to reconnect to the data source, do your pivots again, and then to swap out, replace the old data source with the new one. The nice part is, as long as you still just have question and response fields, generally when you replace data sources through this dropdown, all of your groups and calculations and everything just like automatically translate. So you wouldn't have to like recreate all of those from scratch at least, and hopefully it would just feed your visuals. So it would take a bit of work. It's a little bit extra work, but it's just a bummer that it's too inflexible to be able to accommodate, new columns. So all of this sort of leads me to say, okay, when would you want to prepare your survey data in Tableau Desktop, and then like when would you want to do that somewhere else? I think that there are a few key criteria that would lead me to being okay with preparing the survey data in Tableau Desktop. Maybe I should like write this out as opposed to just like listing it. Just put it over here on the side. Okay, so option number one, maybe you need the data, to be able to sustain like a live connection or update. You aren't doing involved analysis with multi-response questions. I think you get kind of limited there. 3, you are not planning to add new questions to your survey. So those are kind of a few of the criteria where I would say, yeah, if that's you, and then maybe like a fourth, and this is maybe not in addition to, but like, if your data is finalized, right? Like if you're not going to be having new responses and new columns, and you're not trying to analyze multi-response, then yeah, that's probably fine to prepare it in Tableau Desktop. Okay, so if you see some of those limitations though, and you're like, that's going to be a problem for us, we need to do multi-response, or we need this level of flexibility with the survey updating, I've got a few ideas for you. One sort of simple option is, I guess this is probably more so for the multi-response situation, you might be able to do a little kind of pre-preparation of your data, like whether that's in Excel or SQL or Google Sheets or wherever it lives. Like if you could split those columns ahead of time for the multi-response, then you could pivot them in Tableau Desktop. So that's one idea, one option for you. If you wanted to have the duplicate columns, like where I was trying to show, hey, the true false, I want it as a dimension, I also want it in the questions. If you duplicated that column in your data source, then you'd have some flexibility with it. But if that's becoming too involved, too much of a headache, and then again, the multi-response thing, I would probably just recommend using a more flexible data preparation tool if that were the case. Tableau Prep is a great option in kind of the Tableau ecosphere. The only downside is that for automation, if your data is going to be regularly updating, you'd need the data management add-on with Tableau Server. So if you already have that, then cool, no problem. Otherwise, you'd have to like manually update. And then there are a lot of great like partner tools or third-party tools, just to give one example, like Alteryx, which are designed to be able to handle these kinds of situations. And then, of course, if you just want to, prep it in SQL or Python, and you have those skills and capabilities already, then that's, an option as well. So, um, cool. So that kind of covers what I wanted to talk about: how to do it, why to prepare the data this way. What does it open up for you? What are some possible limitations? So just to cover a few frequently asked questions, will there be a recording? Yes, there will. We'll have it out next week. Will there be a copy of this workbook? So if you want to work with this data or explore any of the calculations, yep, I will make sure I publish this to Tableau Public and link to it when I publish the video. And then, if you're looking for help in your own situation, maybe this kind of opens some questions for you, or maybe your questions weren't answered. We're going to do a little Q&A here in a minute, but also you're always welcome just to email me questions, and you can hire us. So, if you're like, hey, I just need some extra help with this whole concept, you're welcome to let me know. So, and I can do kind of mentoring, could do classes on this, just consulting, just do it for you, whatever that might be. So figure we'll just kind of open the floor now. Thanks for sticking through. I know we ran over. I think I'm just way too eternally optimistic, thinking that like, oh, I could definitely do this in 30 minutes. And I guess I'm too chatty. So anyways, let me just open the floor to you. Any questions about preparing survey data in Tableau Desktop? Okay, give me a minute here just to kind of get a few of these jotted down. Yeah, Maida, did you have a question? You're welcome to use the questions dialog, or if that was a purposeful hand raise, let me know, and I think I can unmute you if that's easier. Okay, yeah, let me go ahead and unmute you here. I think that worked. Okay, now I think you need to unmute yourself. Let me know if you see a dialogue come through. Okay, I think I can hear you.
I was looking for where to type, but I thought this was really good. I had dealt with some of survey data inside Tableau, and then we ended up having to do it in Tableau Prep, which it's a lot more flexible. And I love your example because it's short and simple. I'm looking forward the recording, because sometimes you like to go back to it and look at how you did something, I mean, but overall, I enjoy it a lot.
Cool. Thanks, Maida. Yeah. I think, there's a lot of quick calculations we did and just steps where I wish that we could spend more time talking about it, but yeah, so that way you can look at the recording, go through the workbook, and hopefully kind of break things down if there's anything of interest there. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thanks. All right, cool. I just got a link in the chat, so let me just kind of see what I could do with that really quick. See if I'm able to work with the with what I've got there. Yeah, thanks, Miguel. That's interesting. So I'll just kind of pop this on the screen really quick. So Miguel just kind of actually shared an example of. It looks like actually you're maybe even garnering responses to survey results in Tableau, which is awesome. So yeah, I'm assuming kind of using this to collect the information, then also using Tableau to output that as well. That's great. Yeah, I would say that, yeah, you all probably know a lot of the different tools that you would use to like build surveys already. So I'm probably kind of speaking to the experts, but a lot of times we use things like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey. Oh gosh, I'm totally blanking on the name of this one. It starts with a Q. It's based out of Utah. I feel dumb for not remembering it. Anyways, there's another Qualtrics. That's it. Yeah, there's a lot of those kind of common ones that we use, and I would say that for pretty much all of those, the big picture concepts that we talked about in this webinar would apply, and they structure their data in similar ways. Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah. Other questions? Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, Sylvia. Well, I'll stick around here for just like another minute, just in case anybody's typing up something lengthy. But just so that you know, for those that need to drop or those that are just watching the recording, you are always welcome just to shoot me an email as well, and I'll just kind of help as I can with quick questions or responses. And then when I send this recording out, I'm going to link out to a handful of different resources. Like I said, we did a webinar previously about preparing data in Tableau Prep, so that'll kind of show some of the additional capabilities and flexibilities that you get with that tool. And then I've also got some different blog posts I've done about how to handle multi-responses and things like that. So hopefully, again, I'll try and turn it around the next week. I think it's too optimistic to think I'll have it done by tomorrow. So I will aim to get this out by next week and get you all these resources then. So cool. Thank you all so much for being here, for giving your time, for staying late. And yeah, look forward to staying in touch and seeing what you're able to do with this.